Hello, listeners. This talk is about getting our collective acts together on the alt-right. This is a topic that has been on my mind for some time, really since Millennial Woes had his Christmas hangouts. And it's a topic that I have discussed with a few people now in recent weeks and so on, both in real life and online. And I've also received suggestions that I should actually talk about this topic. Partly, I think, because I have a channel, so I have a way of reaching more people about this. Maybe also because I'm older, and perhaps also I'm perceived as being more experienced and knowledgeable. I hesitate to say wise, but nevertheless, some people have suggested that I should do this, or when I've discussed this topic, they have encouraged me to make a talk about this. So it's something I've been thinking about for a long time now, at least a couple of months. And I've been trying to think about what exactly it is I want to say on this topic and so on. Now, this topic has the potential to alienate a few people, maybe even a lot of people. So I will try to be diplomatic, but I think that there are a number of people, or at least a significant subsection of people on the alt-right who do need a foot up the backside rather than being coddled. I mean, I think there is too much coddling in the modern world for young people and so on, and I don't think it does them any favours. Now, the things I'm going to discuss in this talk won't apply to everyone. There are actually a number of people who are quite successful and productive, and they exercise agency and all of these sorts of things on the alt-right. So I'm not talking about those people, and of course it's harder to do many of these things when you have more responsibilities and so on, a career or family and that kind of stuff. But nevertheless, I do think the things about which I'm going to speak are relevant to a lot of people, and it may be a bitter pill to swallow, but maybe they need to swallow this pill. Before I get into all of these criticisms of certain things on the alt-right, I'd like to preface this by saying that I'm not perfect in a lot of the things I'm going to discuss. Many of these things are things that affected me when I was younger, and even to some extent still do. And you know, I still struggle with some of these things at times, and I'm still sort of learning the hard way with a lot of things. But nevertheless, I think I've sort of learned a few things along the way, or had certain observations that I think are pertinent and relevant and so on. So hopefully people will get something from this. All right, so into the talk. There are a lot of NEETs on the alt-right. Now, you may not know what NEETs stands for. I believe it stands for not in education, employment, or training. So it's basically people who are not working, but they're not students either. So they're essentially unemployed. So there are a lot of NEETs on the alt-right. I mean, this is a generational thing also. There are lots of millennials generally who fall into this category, and it's to do with the changing nature of society and work and study and expectations of people and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, I'm most concerned about people on the alt-right, or those who are moving towards the alt-right. I mean, ideally there wouldn't be a lot of people who are wasting their potential in other parts of society also, but really I think we need to just concentrate on the alt-right. Now, many of these people appear to be looking for guidance or advice, that kind of thing. I know not just from my own channel, but from other people. Millennial Woes, for instance, often receives a lot of people who contact him about these sorts of issues, and probably many other people on the alt-right also get this also. So it's a problem. And some of the people who seek out advice and so on and guidance, I mean, they're on the right track. They've taken the first step. They're aware of these problems and that there is something fundamentally wrong with their own lives and also with society more broadly. But others are not consciously aware of these things yet. Some of them will become more conscious. I guess many will become conscious now that I'm bringing this up. But at some level they are aware of things at an unconscious level, and they're reacting to certain situations, certain stimuli and so on within society, even though they're not necessarily aware of how they're reacting or why they are reacting and acting upon various drives. I think that there is a massive amount of potential that's being squandered on the alt-right. Now, part of it is because there are a lot of people in the world who actively stand to benefit from this. They gain money or power by keeping people in a haze of cheap and easy gratification by, bread and circuses, essentially. Of course. So this is not by accident that a lot of this has come to be. But having said that, I think people, especially people on the alt-right, need to take personal responsibility and exercise some level of agency also. Yes, there are lots of problems with the world. The world is screwed up. Yes, our societies are being turned against us or taken away from us. Yes, what are we doing about that? Turning ourselves into victims, basically into white dindus, literally dindu-nothings, people who haven't and aren't doing anything. That's not a solution. Becoming like all of those other people. That's, in some ways, it's a sort of almost a betrayal of the spirit of Western man. And last night I was talking to my wife about Taiwanese society because I had some observations about Taipei. I went to Taipei on the weekend, and it was Monday yesterday, to meet with some people and conduct some business. And one of the things I said to her was, there are all these people here, and this applies also to many places in the West, who literally stand on a mountain of skulls. Their very being, their very existence, their comfort, their lifestyles, all of these things exist now at the end of a very long history of wars, famines, plagues, you name it. And they had an ancestor who somehow survived, but that guy had a brother or a sister or multiple brothers or sisters who didn't survive. And then at some other point, there was someone else in that family tree who somehow survived, but that person had siblings who didn't survive, and so on and so forth. And these people now stand on a mountain of skulls of their ancestors or their ancestors' relatives and so on. And somehow, both genetically and culturally, they've arrived at this point now where they don't have to worry about these things, or it appears that way. I think this is going to change. It's going to come to a head. But nevertheless, they live in such a rarefied atmosphere where they don't know war, they don't know plague and famine and all of these other horrible things. I mean, especially here in Taiwan, you can actually see old people. I was sitting next to someone on the train yesterday, an old guy, and I think he'd had polio as a kid because he had a real problem. One of his legs was shorter than the other, and also he had a pronounced limp. People have known within living memory what it is to have plague and famine and even war. There was a civil war in the 30s and 40s in China, and that's how Taiwan sort of came to be as a nation as a result of that. So even within living memory, there are people who have known these things, and yet their grandchildren, when you go to Taipei, you see these people living completely frivolous lifestyles, and they don't have children. And this is true in the West. Only 70 odd years ago, bombs were falling on Europe, and yet the grandchildren or the great-grandchildren of those people are now living in such a rarefied atmosphere that those things are completely inconceivable to them. And yet they only exist because of this incredible history, this mountain of skulls, as I've already mentioned. And now they're frittering that away on new shiny things, and they're not going to have children. And in some ways that's a betrayal of their ancestors, those hundreds or thousands of generations of people who died in famines and wars and plagues and all of these other things, who got eaten by wild animals, you name it. Who had an accident and got an infection and died because there was inadequate medicine, and so on and so forth. And these people are just frittering away that entire history of their ancestors, both genetically and culturally. And we need to understand that, yes, people are trying to use and abuse us, in a sense, but turning into victims is not the solution. The thing that has always made civilization, the thing that has made Western civilization in particular, is that people were not willing to just say, well, this is enough, this is good enough. They were always pushing for more. They were always trying to improve things, and so on and so forth, improve themselves. And unlike other people in other parts of the world, they weren't content to just say, well, we'll be victims. There were times in their history when they came under threat. There were multiple invasions throughout Europe's history from people from other parts of the world, whether we're talking about the Huns, Attila the Hun, or we're talking about the Ottoman Empire or the Moors. All of these different groups of people tried to invade, and European man struggled against this and somehow bettered himself and went on to create the greatest civilization that's ever existed. But he didn't do that by being a victim. He did that by being proactive and active rather than reactive, and rather than being passive. So, there are a lot of problems in the modern world, but what are people on the alt-right doing? What are they personally doing to make themselves employable, or to have businesses, ways of having money and an economic future? What are they doing there? What are NEETs on the alt-right doing to make themselves attractive to women? What are they doing to put themselves in a position to be able to provide for children and raise them? How can they compete against these other forces? I mean, they'll look around and say, well, you have guys like pickup artists, or you have Hindus and kebabs and all these other people, and they'll say these guys are stealing our women or attacking our women or whatever. But the more fundamental question there is, why aren't the women going to them, to these alt-right NEETs? Why are they turning to these other guys? Either these guys are more appealing in some fashion, or their alt-right guys are not in a kind of an alpha position whereby they can control their women. But either way, the problem at its root is not even with the Hindus or the kebabs or whomever. It's not even with the women. It's with the men on the alt-right. We need to have agency and control our societies, our women, and so on and so forth. So, what are people doing to address the issue of the coming storm? I think many people on the alt-right can recognize that there is a coming storm. There's going to be great turmoil in the next few decades in much of the West. And if we can recognize these things, then it's especially incumbent upon us to do something to prepare for these things. To some extent, someone who is blissfully unaware, you can make excuses for someone like that. You can say, well, that kind of person doesn't really know what's happening, so how can they really solve that problem? How can they react to it? But for someone who actually is aware of that problem, and I assume most people on the alt-right are, otherwise they wouldn't be on the alt-right. They wouldn't have sort of taken that red pill. They wouldn't have bought into that narrative. If people are aware of these things, what are they doing to truly acknowledge them? Because it's not just enough to acknowledge them with thought or in spirit. You still have to act upon those things. You have to live in the world, and you have to do things in reaction to these things, or even better than simply in reaction, to prepare, to look ahead and say, I think I can see a storm on the horizon. I should do something about that now before the storm arrives at me. So this analysis could be applied to any number of situations that seem to have gone off kilter in the West. Where's our agency? What are we doing as individuals and as groups to improve things? What are we doing that is self-destructive or preventing us from realizing our potential? These are the questions we need to ask, and we need to at least attempt to answer. Now, one of the things that really got me onto this whole topic, and it was a particular event, and it was very startling. It was really, it was like a punch in the face for me when this happened. But one of the things that really got me thinking about all this was one of the hangouts that Millennial Woes had at his channel around Christmas time. There was one about video games, and there was a discussion. I was present in that, and people were talking about sort of the potential pros or cons of video games. I heard a lot of self-justification for things that I think are very self-sabotaging, behavior that's very self-sabotaging. In particular, there was one thing. One person there, he mentioned that he had clocked 4,500 hours in only a few years on one single game. Presumably he spent more time in other games as well. And there was, at the time when he said this, and over the next, 10 or 20 minutes, when other people were talking in the hangout, and I was just sitting there thinking about this, I became more and more depressed and dismayed at this 4,500 hours. I think many people have probably heard of the 10,000 hour rule. If you haven't, I'll briefly explain it. It's suggested that 10,000 hours is the number of hours to become a highly proficient, world-class expert on a particular thing. It could be a skill, or it could be a body of knowledge, but approximately 10,000 hours. So, to become a grandmaster chess player, or a classical concert musician, or something like that, or a world-class athlete, or any of these kinds of things, or some sort of expert on history, on a particular field of history, or something like that. But 10,000 hours approximately. And there was a book written by Malcolm Gladwell. I haven't read the book, but I know the whole concept anyway. And 10,000 hours, well, 4,500 hours is just under halfway. But it's deceptive, because it's actually, if you were to look not in terms of the time, but to rank someone compared to a whole lot of other people, someone who had spent 4,500 hours on a particular activity would not be in the middle of everyone else. That person would still be within the top couple of percent. And of course, the other 5,500 hours would put them within the top 0.1% or something like that. But getting close to that halfway mark in terms of the time would actually put someone very close to the top. It doesn't matter what it is, because very few people will spend 4,500 hours on a particular activity. So I'd like to throw some numbers out there to sort of express what 4,500 hours actually represents. And you'll see where I'm going with this fairly quickly. So If we were to say that you spent 40 hours a week in a job or an apprenticeship or something like that, running a business, any of that kind of stuff, 40 hours would be more than 2 hours. Oh, sorry, more than 2 hours, more than 2 years of on-the-job training or an apprenticeship or running your own business, that kind of thing. So, I'm not sure how long an apprenticeship is, but more than 2 years of it, you'd be well on your way to actually being able to do something really useful, being highly functional, being someone who could actually produce something real, and actually be able to earn a living from it, or to be able to actually truly affect people's lives. Another example, if you were to spend 4,500 hours at 30 hours per week over 40 school weeks, and this was actually more time than I spent in when I was studying, but nevertheless, 30 hours per week for 40 school weeks, that's 3.75 years. That's almost a full degree in the US. In Australia, undergraduate degrees, many of them are only 3 years. Mine was only 3 years. So it's a degree in Australia. I think also in the UK. So 4,500 hours. That's what that is. It's a degree. You come away with a degree in something. 4,500 hours. If you spent that on learning a language, to get to the level where you're conversationally fluent and able to independently learn. So sort of for those of you who are aware of the what's called the CEF, the Common European Framework for learning languages, that would be somewhere in B1, B2, that level. To get to that point in a Western European language, so if you wanted to learn French or German or Spanish, that takes about 500 hours. If you wanted to learn a more difficult language, so for instance Chinese or Arabic, they say that's about 2,000 hours. So 4,500 hours would make you fluent, or conversationally fluent, not to the point where you'd be writing a thesis on some obscure branch of philosophy or something like that, but certainly conversationally fluent and able to independently learn. You'd be at that level in multiple languages, certainly multiple Western European languages, in well under 4,500 hours. Another example, if you wanted to learn all about Western culture, the so-called Western canon of literature, from the ancient Greeks and Romans right through till whenever the middle of the 20th century, if you were to read, and if you were a slow reader and you only read 20 pages per hour, and I don't know how fast I read, I think it's about 30 pages, it depends on the book obviously, but about 30 pages per hour. But even if you were slow and you only read 20 pages per hour, in 4,500 hours, you could read 90,000 pages. 90,000 pages, if you were to read decent-sized books, not even your average book, but decent-sized books, bigger than average, because I think the average book is about 200 pages long. There are obviously some that are much longer. But if you were to read books that had 300 pages, you could read 300 books. Now that's pretty much the Western canon. I mean, people, you obviously can't exactly define the Western canon. Is it 100 books? Is it 150 books? Is it 500 books? Whatever, right? But certainly you deal with the core and well beyond the core. So think of whomever, Shakespeare, Dickens, Goethe, Dostoevsky, whomever, right? The really seminal figures. When you were getting out to 300 books, you'd be dealing with pretty obscure figures by that point. So you could basically tackle the entire Western canon in 4,500 hours. If you were to pursue physical fitness and so on, if you went to the gym every day, or 6 days a week, for 1 hour, so 6 hours a week in the gym, that's actually equivalent to 15 years of working out. So, you could get to a point where you'd be pretty strong actually in well under 4,500 hours. You could probably do it in 1,000 hours, maybe well under 1,000 hours actually. Likewise, if you were to go running, 4,500 hours, if you were to run at 8 kilometers per hour, which is, it's not very fast actually, that's 5 miles an hour, that's 857 marathons. Marathon's about 42 kilometers, if I remember correctly. It's about 857 marathons. So, he'd be a really good runner if you ran for 4,500 hours. And probably the least interesting or relevant point here is that if you were to work for just $10 an hour, you'd have $45,000 at the end of it. But you can see there are all sorts of amazing things you could actually do with 4,500 hours. So, for instance, here's a little sort of combination of things you could do. So you could spend 1,000 hours and you'd get to a pretty decent level in French and German. So you could just say, I'm going to learn French and I'm going to learn German. And you could get to a pretty decent level in French and German at 1,000 hours. And that would actually come out, if you were to do this over 4 years, that would come out to less than half an hour a day on each of those languages. Likewise, if you were to spend 1 hour per day in a gym over 4 years, so that's actually 7 days a week, there would be 1,460 hours approximately. And you could get pretty strong in that time. If you were to spend an hour each day, so 1,460 hours over 4 years, working on some sort of business idea, after having done those things, learning French and German, getting pretty physically fit, and working on a business idea, you'd still have 580 hours remaining, which would translate into 38.7 books if there were 300 pages each. Now, of course, 38.7 books is by no means the Western canon, but you could at least, you could just say you'll read 1 or 2 books by each of the sort of major authors. You could become familiar enough with, any of the seminal figures in Western literature. That's what you could achieve with 4,500 hours. Or, over the course of 4 hours, you could spend approximately 3 hours per day playing video games. That's all it is. It's 3 hours per day, approximately, of activity over 4 years. Now, I'm really picking on video games here. I've played video games before. Some of them are tons of fun. They're really challenging, all of that sort of stuff. In particular, there was one series of games that I really liked, the Europa Universalis series. I played the first 3. Highly addictive, really, they're very involved. There are all sorts of different sort of levels of strategy involved and so on. But I have not played Europa Universalis 4, and I'm not going to play that game because I know that I would just be sucked into playing that game, and it would become an enormous time sink for me, absolutely enormous. You wouldn't, I'd disappear off the face of the earth. You would never hear from me again. My channel would cease to exist. My wife would be complaining. I'd be up till all hours of the morning. I know that that's what would happen if I did that. But even beyond that, now I won't even spend a few minutes here or there on playing any video game, because these things are always start a particular way. They're a gateway drug, these things. It's like saying you're going to eat a single potato chip or a single chocolate. You never just eat a single potato chip. You never eat a single chocolate. Whatever it is, you might maybe don't like potato chips. Think of something that you really like that's in very small portions, but they're all in one packet, right? You're not going to eat just one. Most people are not going to eat just one because we haven't evolved that way. Video games are the same. We always think, I'll just finish this turn. I'll just play one more game. I'll just finish this quest or finish this level or whatever it is. I'll just do this extra little thing. 5 hours later, what happened? Well, it's because all of these things have been highly engineered to provide instant reinforcement to you. And you want more, and you want more, and you want more, right? Because you're getting this little hit. I think it's dopamine. I'm not sure. I think it's dopamine. You're getting this little hit in your brain. There's a little release of a chemical, and it's highly addictive. And these things have been engineered this way. They've undergone a sort of Darwinian competition, because there are all these people out there producing video games, or there are all these people out there producing various foods, whatever it is, all of these things, and they're all competing against each other to essentially make a more addictive drug, right? Whether the drug is a video game or junk food or whatever. They're all competing against each other, and there's this sort of Darwinian arms race that's going on. And then it comes to you at the end of this long process, and there are all these sort of biopsychological hacks, essentially, that have just completely bypassed our normal way of dealing with these things, because we grew up in very low stimulus environments. We evolved in environments as a species that were really low in caloric content, that didn't have, nothing moved really quickly. Occasionally a predator moved very quickly, but by and large, everything moved slowly. You weren't overloaded with flashing bright things all the time. And so we evolved in a very low stimulus environment, and then someone has come along with this biopsychological hack of high stimulus activity, whether it's in terms of calories or bright shiny things, and it's just they've completely got past us, because we wanted all of those things, because we were in a low stimulus environment or low energy environment. Whenever we did encounter very brief, very uncommon instances of those things, we just gorged ourselves on them, because often that was a matter of survival. If we didn't, then we didn't know when our next meal was going to arrive, So when we did have the opportunity, we had to gorge ourselves. But now we live in an environment where we're just overwhelmed with this stuff all the time. And people are engineering it to be even better and better and better at hacking these biological or psychological processes that go on with us. And we are just sort of at the mercy of this to a large extent. The way to solve this problem is stop playing video games. And that's just the start. But stop playing video games, because they're a gateway drug, and they've been designed to just suck you into this world of bright, shiny things that's going to completely overwhelm you. And really the way to resist these things is to not expose yourself to them to begin with. Because, for instance, if you put people in front of a whole lot of sugar or fat or salt, I mean, not, a pile of sugar or a pile of fat or a pile of salt, not like that, but, you mix them up and cook them, right? Produce whatever it is that is your weakness, chocolate cake or a potato chip or a donut or something. If you put people in front of a whole lot of those three things, particularly if you can combine all three, they're not going to be able to resist. Some people will for some time, but this is not a matter of willpower, because if this were only a matter of willpower, then that tells me that the vast majority of the human race, including me, and including many of the people listening right now, we actually don't have very good willpower. But that's because we evolved in an environment that was low stimulus, low energy, and so on, or low caloric content, and it was part of our survival mechanism was that we did gorge ourselves on those things when we got them, when we had the opportunity. We had to, because the rest of the time we were in a sort of a caloric deficit and so on and so forth. And so it was actually our survival strategy to gorge ourselves upon these things. So it's not just a matter of willpower. This is hardwired into us and has been for hundreds of thousands of years. It's our deep evolutionary biology and psychology, and it's been hacked by people who spend all day thinking about this. They design it, they test it, they refine it. You don't stand a chance if you're exposed to it. You just don't stand a chance. And I know someone will say, well, I have. Okay, great. But why is obesity just exploding all over the world? If it were that simple, why would all these people be obese? If it were that simple, why is it the case that, I got on a train yesterday and I looked around and 3/4 of the people had their faces buried in their Me phones or whatever stupid little handheld devices they had, just, their thumbs going, texting each other inane things with little, dancing bears and smiley faces, or playing some crazy computer game, whatever, but just stimulus all the time, and just these little things going off in their brain, constantly reinforcing them. Why, when you look around, are all these people like that? Because it's not just a matter of willpower. They have just been eaten alive by this thing that has completely hacked their evolutionary biology and their evolutionary psychology. The solution is to not expose yourself to those things. Maybe you think, well, I can just play 20 minutes of computer games a day and that's fine. Maybe you can, okay? So maybe this doesn't apply to you. But in all reality, that's not what is happening out there. It's not what is happening to NEETs. Stop playing video games. And this is just the start. Identify anything that is highly addictive to you, that is a time sink, and that leaves you with nothing at the end of it. And I know some people say, well, but I do get something from playing computer games. Really be honest about that, and 90-something% of what you think you're gaining from playing video games, you're actually not really gaining anything. Just be honest about that. You need to cut these things out of your life. These things are a poison. These things, they could be junk food, they could be television, porn, whatever. Anything that you just sink a whole bunch of hours into and you don't come away with anything, and people say, oh, but what about books, Okay, if you think that interacting with the greatest minds in history is a time sink, then I don't know what I can say to you about that. I think that comes from a position of complete ignorance. But nevertheless, if you think that there's no difference between playing a video game and reading Tolstoy, then I'm not really sure what I can say to you about that. But as I said, I went to Taipei this weekend. I went on Sunday and I came back on Monday evening. I had to conduct some business there. Incidentally, I actually managed to meet up with 2 of my listeners. One guy I'd met before. Some of you may remember John Matrix from some of those hangouts I did in January. And also a friend of his who actually introduced him to the channel. That was really good. I hung out with those guys for a few hours. Interesting guys, cool guys. But I was mostly there to conduct some business yesterday. But the whole time I was in Taipei, it's sort of this hyper-modernity. It's all these people who are just burning their genes, just shredding their IQ. It's because, it's full of smart people, beautiful people, these beautiful women, and everyone's dressed really well. Everything is new. Everything is kind of shiny and bright and all of this stuff. And you can walk down the street and see 100 interesting things within the space of 10 meters or 100 meters. All of them calling out to you, buy me, buy me, buy me. And it's a city full of people. I don't know what the fertility rate is, because the fertility rate in Taiwan as a whole is somewhere around 1. And the farther away you get from Taipei, the more kids you see. So I imagine it's sub 1 in Taipei. It's probably 0.5 or something, or 0.7 or whatever, right? There are all these, the smartest people in the country, the most beautiful people in the country, the most interesting people in the country, all of this stuff, they're all concentrated there and they're not having kids. Instead of having kids, they're just throwing their genes away and their culture. This culture that's existed for thousands of years and is one of the world's ancient great cultures, they're just throwing that away because they're not having kids. And what are they spending it on? Their time and money. Well, they're going overseas, they're buying new clothes, all of this stuff. When I was at Taipei main station yesterday, waiting for my train, I was just walking around looking at all this stuff, and I thought maybe I'd buy a little thing for my wife. So I went into a couple of souvenir shops, and they had, these little figurines or keychains. So some of these things were $20, $30. And all these people buy this stuff, presumably, because for those shops to exist there, I imagine the rent is quite high at Taipei main station. So people are buying this stuff, and there were other people, I saw other people there, and I saw people buy some things, and all these cake shops, and, just in one section, you walk along and there are, a dozen cake shops, and the cakes are all $20 at least for these cakes, or little boxes of individually wrapped cakes or whatever, sweet things. And I saw people buying these things, and they just, every day they walk out of the house and they just throw away, $100 a day just on absolute garbage, right? It's just, it's sugary things and bright things, right? Bright, shiny things. Just, another cake, they buy a cake for their friend, or their friend buys them a cake, or they buy a cake for themselves. It's just sugar, that's all it is. It's literally just sugar, right? Because it's refined white flour. So all of the good parts of the grain have been taken away, and then it's got like maybe a tiny bit of dairy, tiny bit of egg or something in it. It's basically just flour and sugar, empty calories. There's no protein. There are no vitamins or minerals. It's just empty calories. Just, sugar. And then people buying just all these little knickknacks and stuff, and they'll attach them to their bag, or they'll get a new pair of shoes or whatever. And they just churn through these things, right? They get a new pair of shoes every month or every 2 months. The old ones are fine still. They don't look brand new, but they're sort of 95% brand new. But they get rid of them, get a new pair. And okay, if they have an enormous amount of money to spare, whatever, right? But they don't. All of that comes at the cost of them not having kids, because then they can't afford to have kids, because they don't have the money to have kids, but also they don't have the time to have kids, because they have to go to their inane job, shuffling some paper, doing something that I don't really understand exactly how that really benefits most people. They shuffle some paper, but they need to do that and work 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, whatever, so that they can then go out on the weekend and blow their money on crap, which then means they have to go to their job on Monday so they can earn money to blow it the next weekend on crap. And they're just a dog chasing its tail, or a hamster on one of those little wheels in a hamster cage, right? That's what they're doing. And they're just, each turn of the hamster wheel, it's like there's one ovulation gone from a woman. There's one egg that will never exist again. That's potentially one pregnancy gone, like that. And they do it again and again. Another turn of the hamster wheel, another turn of the hamster wheel. That's happening in the West as well. Everywhere you go, anywhere in the world, you go to a big city, and it's all these women just another month goes by. Well, this month they took a little trip to wherever, or they bought X number of outfits, or they went out to eat with their friends or whatever X number of times. Another month goes by, another egg is gone, And then you end up with these fertility levels everywhere in the developed world, in the West, in East Asia. All these things are sub-fertility levels, and they're just frittering it away on sugar and shiny stuff. That's what it is, sugar and shiny stuff. We shouldn't be doing this, because we can see all of these problems. We're aware of them. We've taken the red pill. We're aware of all of these problems, whether they're social problems, problems between the sexes, problems to do with the culture, problems to do with economics, whatever. Any of these red-pilled issues, any of these alt-right issues, we're aware of them, we see them, we know about them. At least you could perhaps say with these other people, they're blissfully unaware. We're aware of these things. And whether it's that you're running like a hamster on a wheel by working 10 hours a day so you can go and buy crap, or whether you're a neat sitting at home playing X number of hours of video games per day, or watching the latest degenerate television series or whatever, it all ends up in the same place. It all ends up with complete civilizational collapse. It all ends up with you standing on the top of that mountain of skulls of your ancestors and gleefully just adding to it, but not really adding to it because there's nothing after you. On the alt-right, people need to use their time, their money, their energy to look after themselves physically, to learn new things, to develop real skills, to become financially independent, to make connections with like-minded people, to start families, to create truly great art, music, literature and so on, to discover and invent, even to go to church if that's your thing. They need to do positive things. Everything else is detrimental. Everything else is degenerate. We need to not be degenerate. We can see these things. We can see the world falling apart around us. We can see the coming storm. No one else sees it. No one else cares. Or some people do see it and care. And they're the ones engineering it. They're the ones profiting from it. They actively want it. But we're the only ones who can hold the line here. We're the only ones who can keep it together. And we're the only ones who can truly shame degeneracy. We need to shame degeneracy. We need to stop giving people validation for doing degenerate things. Only we can validate each other for holding the line and keeping civilization together, or even advancing it. Only we can do that, because all of those other people, they will mock us, they will shame us, they will try to stop us from doing those things. Only we can do that. And it will only be done by us. No one else will do it. It's incumbent upon each of us to take responsibility and do this as individuals, as groups. We need to do them for ourselves and for each other and for people who are not even born yet. That mountain of skulls, the skull at the bottom, or one of the skulls at the bottom, that was a guy who maybe he wasn't even truly aware of it or truly understood it, but at some deep level he did. He understood that it wasn't just about him right now in this moment, his personal gratification in this moment. There was something beyond him, and something would be beyond him, something would continue beyond him. We need to do likewise. Perhaps we'll fail, but if we don't even try, then we certainly will fail. Do not be a degenerate. Be a man of the West. This is your destiny. This is your history. It was the destiny of those who came before you. You are their destiny made manifest. Be men of the West together. Be heroic. Be a company of heroes. Because the first part of the universal hero's journey is acknowledging this and embracing it. That's what we need to do. So that's the end of the talk. As always, thank you for listening, and please comment beneath.